One might think from the last few weeks here at Trinity that Steve is like trying to get known by Hollywood or something. He's become the star of every one of our videos. But a great video and moving you, hopefully, beyond laughter to checking out our small group expo. We'll tell you more about that in a minute. I want to introduce you to Jenny Stevenson. Would you say hello to her? Very good. Good job. Some people typically say hello by clapping, so it's good to know now that you know that. But I wanted you to hear a little bit of Jenny's story today, and it's very powerful. It's a great example of God on the move in our lives, and there's so many stories even right here in this worship center today. But I want you to hear Jenny's. Jenny, maybe you can begin by just giving everyone kind of a snapshot of life now related to family and a little bit about you that way.
Sure. So my family and I moved here about 2 years ago from Utah. My husband Justin and I have been married for 9 years. We have 4 kids. Amaya is 13, Micah is 8, Naomi, I'm forgetting my kids, Naomi is 6, and Tatum is 4.
It's those curveball questions. You're like,
right,
are you
I
kidding?
know,
You were going to ask me that? I have experience in that. That's for another day. So tell us this, Jenny, that's family now, kind of a good snapshot of where you guys pull back, and let's talk a little bit about the family of origin, kind of paint that picture in broad strokes growing up.
Sure. So typically, when I was really young, I thought of my family as like the typical nuclear family, a military family anyway. My dad was in the Air Force, so he was from Maryland. My mom was from Germany, and most of my siblings and I were born in Japan.
Typical, right? That's right.
It was
very
typical to me. So when I was about 4, we moved back to the States, and we moved to Utah. And at a young age, I really began to see some cracks in my family, and I realized that my dad had a drinking problem, which just grew in intensity as time went on. So over the years, he attempted to seek treatment and help for his alcoholism, and it was just never effective. So that led to a couple of times my mom had to take my 5 siblings and I and go live in a women and children's shelter because it just wasn't safe at home. I remember a particular time we were living in a shelter. It was probably 3 or 4 miles away from the school that I went to. And so my mom had to get us all up early. We didn't have a vehicle, so we had to walk all that way. And that's not that big of a distance now, but when you're, 5, that's a long way to walk. And so I remember just crying and not wanting to make that walk and just wishing that I was in a wheelchair because that would be so much easier. Somebody could just push me. Yeah, short-sighted. So sometime after that, my parents finally separated, and they had the hopes that my dad would be able to get better and they could reconcile, and that just never happened. When I was about 6, my dad suddenly died of an aortic aneurysm and left my mom to raise all 6 of us kids on her own with no family around, no real support system, so that was really rough. My mom returned to school so that she could provide for us, and that left us alone quite a bit. My sister reminded me of some of the hard times that we went through during that time, just not having really much of anything. My mom would take us around to parks so we could collect aluminum cans so we could recycle and have a little extra money. Times were hard where we didn't have much food, and so what we would have for dinner is toast with bacon grease. So that was hard, right? My older siblings especially struggled in a way that was different than the younger ones, and they ended up rebelling, and that just was really difficult for our family. So I wish I could say at this point that things kind of turned around and we experienced a season of calm, but that didn't really happen. I won't go into real detail about it, but over the next several years, there was an affair, a remarriage, a subsequent affair, an eventual divorce, which left my mom really, really broken. And that brings us up to my high school years.
So one of the things within that context, there was actually, you guys were involved in local churches, right. And there was kind of a friendship, a unique relationship that formed with like a sister-like character. Tell us a little bit about her.
Okay, so we did always grow up going to church. And my sisters and I were always in the choir from a young age, and so we really enjoyed that. So one of the choir directors, about the time I was in middle school, high school, her name was Nicole, and she was always super kind to me. She just really seemed to have an affection for me and look out for me. I would babysit her kids occasionally. I could talk to her about biblical things that just didn't really seem to make sense to me. And it was just a really comfortable environment. I was never afraid that I would be looked down upon, that I could go to her and trust the answers that she was giving me were really honest. So that was really a great influence in my life. She just poured into my life at a time where there were no other adults who were consistently a part of our lives since we were away from any other family. So she even attended my high school graduation, which is a real sign of love right there. Right?
You've been to those, right? Na, 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 na. Awesome. So God would use Nicole in your life at a real pivotal time as a high school student, but it would be years later, even after that disconnection, that God really used her in a very powerful way. Tell us kind of the things that led up to that.
Okay. So, like I said, high school was just really unstable at home, and by the time I was graduating, I just knew that I needed to get away. I couldn't take that chaos anymore. And so my choices were join the Air Force or go to college. And so, as brave as I am, I decided to move 45 minutes away and go to college. So when I got there, I just was so excited. I had this newfound freedom, and I was really looking forward to making my life my own. But it didn't take long before that excitement faded and just exposed the great lost feeling that I had inside that had always really been there. I think I just had never had any time away to realize that it wasn't just a circumstance of my family, it was a deep emptiness that I had. So even though I'd always grown up in church, right, I knew the basic Bible stories, I knew a few foundational truths, but I had no real strong foundation. I never read the Bible for myself. I always kind of felt like it was one of those things that other people do, and they explain it to me. It wasn't something that I could do on my own. So when I got to this point in my life where I felt like I needed some real direction, I didn't really know how to turn to God. So instead of turning to God, I turned to the first person who showed a real sincere interest in me. And unfortunately, that person wasn't a believer of the Jesus of the Bible, right? So at the end of my freshman year in college, I found out I was pregnant and absolutely terrified. Neither of us really knew what to do, but I knew for certain that I would keep my baby. So we decided to take the summer to kind of figure things out. And somewhere I kind of decided I would go back to my old church, talk to some of the adults that I trusted there and kind of seek their counsel. And then somewhere along the lines, I just decided, no, I don't really care what anybody has to say. I'm just going to do things my way. And so December 22nd, 2003, my incredibly beautiful little baby girl was born, and I did not know I could love that deeply. December 24th, I was proposed to, and I accepted, and we were excited and looked forward to this new life together with our little family. And maybe about 6 weeks later, I remember sitting on the couch, holding my little baby, and the phone rang. So my then fiance brought me the phone, and it was the old choir director, whose name was Nicole. And she just asked me how things were going, what our future plans were, things like that. And then she started sharing verses with me. Now, I can't remember what those verses were. I just remember God speaking so clearly through that conversation to let me know that if I chose to go ahead with this marriage, I would never be able to live for him the way that he created me to, and neither would my children. And I just broke. I just sat there on the phone. I didn't say a word. I just wept. And that was the beginning of the end of that relationship, and it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to go through. And that wasn't even the end, right? Like, life didn't end there. We continued on, and as difficult and heartbreaking as things were continuing on from that moment, there was never a time that I regretted that decision, because Jesus is always better.
Amen. Amen. Would you guys thank Jenny? Thank you so much.